Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today I want to talk about the new docu-series that premiered on Netflix this past week called Encounters. It's from Steven Spielberg's Amblin Entertainment television company, and I got to say it's fantastic. I really enjoy this series. There's 4 episodes, and I'm going to talk about in today's podcast, I'm going to focus on the first episode called Messengers, and I'll talk about the other 3 episodes in upcoming podcasts. This is very well done stuff. This is like on the level of some of the James Fox documentaries that we've seen. The Jeremy Corbell documentaries, very well produced, very interesting witnesses, fantastic stuff. This first episode focused primarily on the Stephenville, Texas incident of 2008, where hundreds of people saw a gigantic craft flying around, a giant lighted craft with. Where they say you could have landed a jet airliner on it, was so big. It's very similar to the 1997 Phoenix Lights incident. And one of the people that they talked to in this documentary is Steve Allen. He's a pilot and a businessman, and he was the first witness to contact the local newspaper, the Stephenville Empire Tribune. Basically, on January 8th, 2008, Steve Allen was sitting around a campfire with 2 of his friends on his property, and they saw this giant object coming near them, big lighted object, and then it took off at an incredible speed. He ended up contacting the newspaper about this. He talked to late reporter Angela Joyner. She passed away in 2021, and she reported on this at the time. And that was the first article about the Stephenville incident. And very interesting stuff. Another person that they talked to in this episode was Leroy Gouton. He was a constable in nearby Dublin, Texas, and he saw this object from near where he lived. And this was in Erath County in Texas, by the way. And then it turned out that after the story went in, it turned out there were hundreds of people that had seen this thing. Flying around, whatever it was. The episode also points out that there was a Freedom of Information Act request that to get the FAA radar reports when these sightings happened, and the radar reports corroborated what all the witnesses were saying. Yeah, that there was this object here and it was moving really, really fast, and that's what the radar reports showed. Very interesting episode. The one thing I didn't know was with regard to what Ricky Sorrells, one of the witnesses, had seen, had actually seen, which was something was never. I didn't see it anywhere before, and this was the first time I ever heard of it. But he actually saw beings in the craft. Now, Ricky Sorrells, he was on. I remember when this incident happened. He had appeared on CNN. He was on the Larry King show at the time and talking about this. What he had seen. He actually, when the report showed up in the newspaper, Sorrells, then he went public with what he had seen actually 2 weeks earlier in late December 2007. He had gone out hunting, and he was walking through the forest near his home with his rifle, and the next thing you know, it got dark all of a sudden. It was like a big shadow covered him, and he looked up and he saw this giant craft hovering very low over trees, and he couldn't see the ends of it. He couldn't see it was so big he couldn't see where it ended. He said it eventually took off at a 45-degree angle, and there was absolutely no sound whatsoever. And then Sorrells, he did not appear personally for this show. Apparently, he went quiet. He went silent at some point, and it could have been because government agents were showing up at his house, threatening him, telling him he needs to stop talking about this. Stop talking about what he saw. No, don't tell anybody about it. He said there was people coming and harassing him, basically. In fact, they said at one point he went into his pickup truck and there was a bullet sitting on his dash. So he felt very threatened that at some point he just stopped talking to people about what he had encountered. But according to Steve Allen at the time, Steve Allen had talked privately, I guess, with Ricky Sorrells, and Sorrells had told Steve Allen, according to this documentary, that not only did he see this craft, but he saw a being in the craft, an insect, a being that looked like an insect. It looked like a praying mantis, according to Steve Allen. That's what Ricky Sorrells had told him. but there was so that that's another interesting aspect. So is that who is it? Isn't running some of these craft praying mantis aliens like we hear of in alien abduction cases? Well, could be. But it was very convincing, all of it. I mean, obviously, these people, hundreds of people, all these people, the witnesses that they had on here, these people weren't lying. Obviously, they saw something that defies explanation. Obviously, these things aren't from this world. They're not man-made. There's no possible way. But yet, there are some skeptics among us still, and I'll get into that a little bit later on here. But I thought it was another interesting thing was you see in this show how the stigma could affect people. The managing editor of this newspaper at the time, she was a prominent person in this documentary. She was the managing editor for the Stephenville Empire Tribune. Her name is Sarah Vandenberg, and she was leaving for work the day that Steve Allen had contacted the newspaper and was talking to Angela Joyner about his sighting, and she was leaving, and Sarah Vandenberg was leaving for the day, and before she left, she heard this that there was a UFO sighting, and she goes, "Oh, we'll talk about it tomorrow." Yeah. And then the next morning when she got up, she saw the front page of the newspaper, and the top of the fold, it had the story about the UFO sighting, and she got all upset, this editor, Sarah Vandenberg, because she thought it was going to ruin her career that she was talking about UFOs on the front page of her newspaper. And she stormed in her office, and she found out that the publisher of the paper had demanded that story go on the front page. And actually, the newspaper had sold out. Actually, it was so popular. It was one of the most popular newspapers they had ever. So I thought that was interesting that the editor was talking about this, how she felt about it at the time. I think that's so interesting, is that you see here how the stigma affects people, and even and also how sometimes a sighting could have derogatory effects on a person. Like Steve Allen was talking about what this did to his life. You know, he became obsessed with UFOs, and he says it basically led to his divorce after a 17-year marriage. Because he became so obsessed with UFOs. That's what he wants answers. He wants answers. And guess what? The government's not giving any answers. Instead, what they do, they go to people like Ricky Soros and tell them to shut up. Oh, actually, Steve Allen had a phone call from somebody from the Pentagon who was making veiled threats. A fantastic documentary. I highly recommend this. You're going to love it. Really well put together show. Great documentary. Of course, it's coming from Steven Spielberg and his production company. Wow, I guess it's expected when someone of Steven Spielberg's stature. Of course, you're going to get some good stuff. This was very, very good. And of course, I'll talk about some of the other 3 episodes during upcoming podcasts. But yeah, I highly recommend this. I don't see how anybody could walk away from this. If you're someone who was on the fence or a skeptic, I don't see how anybody could watch something like this and walk away thinking, oh, there's nothing to this. But, just as I talked in my previous podcast about how I really believe that this is a smart people problem, right? Smart people need to be, because obviously if you're not there at this point, well, then you're not smart. Obviously, that's how I feel. That's where I'm at with this. But anyway, there was an article about this, a review written by Richard Roper for the Chicago Sun-Times. Of course, Richard Roper is a longtime movie critic, and he still doesn't think that this doesn't move the needle for him. All right, none of these things do. None of you would have thought that a documentary like The Phenomenon from James Fox from a few years ago would have moved the needle for skeptics, but they don't. They just still don't believe. They don't believe anybody, and they have a bunch of dumb. They still have a whole bunch of dumb questions that they ask, as I will illustrate here. Anyway, the title of his Chicago Sun-Times review here is UFO series Encounters Won't Sway Any Skeptics, and he goes on here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to read some snippets from this. He writes here, even though this sincere and intermittently interesting docuseries, intermittently, let me just stop there for a minute. It's wholly interesting. This whole thing, this documentary series will have you, will basically have you mesmerized. There's no question about it. It says, even though this sincere and intermittently interesting docuseries bears the imprint of Steven Spielberg's Amblin Television, There are times when Spielberg's alien visitation classics Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T. feel at least as plausible as some of the claims made by the eyewitnesses and true believers showcased in the series. Well, of course, I don't know. So he's comparing what the people are saying in this to the E.T., saying it seems it's putting them on pace with science fiction movies that Spielberg had made, which is absolutely absurd. And he goes on here. He says, with director Jan Motzkin delivering solid work that revisits 4 well-known stories of alleged UFO sightings, Encounters plays like a respectful video Wikipedia recap with a sprinkling of new revelations. While I don't discount the possibility that beings from other worlds have dropped by, I remain deeply skeptical with the same questions many Earthlings have been asking since the first recorded alleged sightings of UFOs, or AKA UAP, unidentified. He says unidentified aerial phenomena. It's unidentified anomalous phenomena now. Just like a lot of these people in the mainstream media, they just don't study this enough. They don't care enough about this subject to even know that was changed. And they keep making that mistake and calling it aerial phenomena when now it's being, the acronym stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena. But some of the dumb questions that Roper has here, as all skeptics do, or you've seen this movie before. Wait till you hear. It says one of his questions is why do UFOs almost never drop in on major metropolitan areas, instead choosing to contact a few folks in remote and rural locales? Well, as I just talked about with in that Alaska triangle story in my previous podcast. It seems like why would they go to a metropolitan area? Obviously, these beings that are here, they're operate under heavy secrecy. They don't really want people to know what's going on. Sometimes it seems that they show displays to certain people, but they never do it on such a grand scale where the whole world is rocked. It's always, yeah, that's true, and that's what's going on. But so he's asking this question: why do they do that? Well, because obviously they're being secretive about it. But this guy hasn't studied this subject enough to even know the answer to that or what the answer might be. He doesn't have any. He's not interested in it. So of course he's going to remain skeptical. None of this moves the needle for him. It's not going to prompt someone like Richard Roper to grab a book about this and try to educate himself on this subject. He doesn't want to even think about it. Anyway, here's another question he has. Why is the video and film footage always so grainy and inconclusive? Well, let me just stop there. We talk about this a lot. For one thing, there are some really good pictures of flying saucers and other strange craft that have been taken over the years. There is some stuff. But obviously, these beings, they don't want you to know what's going on. In fact, in the first episode, Messengers, well, with regard to the Stephenville incident, a month after the main sighting in January, in early February, this Leroy Goutin, the constable, saw this strange orb floating above him, and so he got the camera from his vehicle, from his police vehicle, and tried to film it. And then when he got home and watched it, because they're still using VHS tapes at that time, he tried to watch the video, and it wasn't working right. Like, it was there and then it would disappear, like it was malfunctioned for some reason when he tried to film this thing. These beings have, people who are skeptics they can't think outside the box here. Obviously, these beings are using some sort of technology sometimes to prevent people from filming them. It doesn't matter if you're using the latest cell phone or you're using an old movie handheld film camera. It doesn't matter. It seems like these things when you're up close to them, it's hard to film them for whatever reason. And it's like the radio static that you get sometimes when these things show up. There's all kinds of things that they're doing to block you getting the proof that you need to take back and show everybody. These beings are obviously way ahead of us, way ahead of the 10 paces ahead of us, if not more. But anyway, he's never thought this through. And another question he has is why is it always a flying saucer or a cigar-shaped ship? And why does almost every description of the alien sound the same? Long limbs and oversized heads and oversized eyes. Well, what could anybody do about that? That's what they look like. For the most part, the beings that people encounter the most are these gray beings with these oversized heads and small bodies, and they're short. That's most of the time. That's what you hear. And as far as being cigar shaped or flying saucers, well, that's what they look like. They manufactured them. Well, how do we know why they made them that way? He's asking us those questions. Well, we need those answers from the extraterrestrials themselves. We don't know what that is. But see, he's not thought this true. And then another question he has, it says, why do the aliens never, ever, ever stage a big press conference to explain exactly why they're here and what they're hoping to accomplish? Well, let's just stop here again. Well, why would they do that? I mean, obviously they don't want us to know that what they're up to, right? Obviously some of them are up to something. Some of them are apparently up to no good. It looks like the Greys, the reptilians, and insectoids ones, they seem like to be up to some sort of possible hybridization program, but he probably doesn't even know about that because he never studied it. But we don't know why they're not going to. These people think that they should land on the White House lawn. They think that for some reason these beings would think the same way. If they're intelligent, then they would think the same way that we are, and they're going to land. If they're going to come here and find our planet, they're going to land. They're going to want to meet us in some sort of a dignified venue and have a nice sit down for a nice big dinner. You know, that's what these people think. It's so idiotic. I can't believe that I'm reading this, and this is in a major newspaper in the United States. It says here, and then he says, why do they never attack but also never communicate their desire for peace? Well, I don't know. We don't know why they're not attacking out. Actually, he thinks that if they are going to attack us, it's going to be War of the World style, right? Or if they're not going to attack us and they're here on peace, it's going to be Day of the Earth Stood Still style, where they're going to come down and say, we want peace. I mean, what is he thinking? He's basing his whole concept of extraterrestrials on Earth from the Hollywood movies he grew up watching. It's unbelievable. And then he goes on to say, another question he has, if they're sophisticated enough to travel here from unimaginable distances, why do they refrain from speaking with us or even interacting with us for any extended period of time? Well, for one thing, they're way advanced. That would be like me wanting to interact with the yellow jacket flying around on the front porch. I mean, come on, what's he thinking here? That's what it is. He's not thinking. None of these debunkers are thinking ever. None of these skeptics are thinking. And then his final question here is, aliens? Really? Oh, like it's so fantastic, isn't it? The idea that there could be other beings out there that are more intelligent than us, and they're traveling to Earth sometimes to study us, to study this planet. Some of them could be just here to look at us a little bit and then take off, and then some of them could be here wanting to take over secretly somehow, covertly. But see, he's never thought this through. He's never read a book on it. And this is the mind of a skeptic, the mind of a debunker on display. Of course, I'll leave the link to this article so you can read the entire thing. But also, I thought was interesting in this first episode was there was a guy who was getting interviewed or just talking about his experiences. Matthew Roberts. He was a naval intelligence cryptologist. And he left the Navy because he wanted to talk publicly about it. He basically left a pension on the table and benefits, and because he thought it was more important to talk publicly about the reality that there is some presence here. He called it it's a great big open secret. He was also happened to be on the United States USS Roosevelt during the famous gimbal incident. So he was in that episode too, and it was. Some of the things he was saying was very interesting. In fact, he said he had his own alien encounters. So overall, I think this first episode is fantastic. I give it a 4 out of 4 stars, no question about it. It was great. It's sad to see that, I can't believe that if any skeptic watching this would not be swayed. It's hard to believe, but obviously that's what's happening when you read articles like this review from someone like Richard Roper. Who basically has all these dumb questions that he doesn't understand why we can't have them answered. Why don't they just land? And why don't they just land on the White House lawn and meeting with the president already? I mean, what are they so secret about? How come they're not showing up over New York City or Dallas, Texas all at once, and just showing themselves already? Why aren't they doing that if they're here? Huh? Answer me that. Think about how stupid that sounds. It's so stupid, but that's what he's asking, right? Why is the film footage always so grainy? Why? Unbelievably. Why are they shaped like saucers or cigar shaped all the time? Why do they shape like that? Can you answer me that one? Why do these beings have big heads and big eyes? How come they're always described that way? Could you tell me, please? This is like your standard debunker skeptic right there. That's the kind of dumb questions because they can't think. Because again, like I was just talking, if you don't believe, I was just saying, some people were upset. I got a couple of messages. I did get a couple of messages from people from my last podcast saying, "Oh, I'm a jerk," right? But guess what? You're not. If you think like this guy, guess what? You're not smart. You're not smart. This guy is not smart. Richard Roper is dumb. Anyway, moving on. I want to talk about some other things here. I actually received a comment, an interesting comment from somebody. It was on my YouTube channel. It was from Crypto Citizen 2292, and this was in. He provided this comment for my latest episode. The UFO extraterrestrial phenomenon is a smart people problem. So what he said here, he said he has his own idea about skeptics. And I think this is interesting and something to take into consideration. He says here, I've been talking with co-workers about this topic, kind of trying to poll their opinions on it. And the vast majority believe in it, or at least believe it's possible. However, the 2 or 3 holdouts have interesting reasons for being skeptical. First of all, none of them have even heard of Mick West and other debunkers. The UFO community puts a lot of emphasis on what the debunkers have to say, but in reality, they're preaching to a very small choir. Yes, I can understand that. But see, I think the problem is that they might not have heard of people like Mick West or people like that. But see, Mick West has an effect on the mainstream news, as you see in so many different articles and on some of the news networks. They'll bring Mick West on to give his opinion, and then so the mainstream media doesn't take it seriously, and in turn, because the mainstream media doesn't take it seriously because they're listening to people like Mick West, then the mainstream media thinks it's a joke, and so then that's passed on. I mean, that kind of feeling is it's passed on to other people as people are watching TV. But that's the concern with Mick West. Yeah, a lot of these regular people, right? Most people never heard of this guy. People in my family never heard of Mick West. I could if I was to say something to my brother about Mick West, he'd say, "Who?" Right? Most people didn't hear about him. But of course, one of my brothers is a big time skeptic. So. But he gets his ideas from other people. Like, he'll listen to mainstream news people. See, it all gets filtered through. As long as you have people out there, dissenting voices, promoting idiocy, it just keeps. It's like a disease. It's like a virus. But that's just my feeling on that. But anyway, let's continue with this comment here. He says, on the other hand, my skeptical coworkers had one thing in common. They're all big fans of South Park, The Simpsons, Family Guy, and other similar shows. The UFO alien topic is always used as a comedic element in those shows, and that has tremendously shaped their real-life opinions. Yes, their thinking is that shallow. I have nothing against parodying this topic or any topic, but you'd be surprised how many people shape their entire worldview on what comedy shows / specials have to say. Well, let me just say this, and that's I hear that's exactly true. There are people like that, and I've met people like this too who think this way. You talk about extraterrestrials, and they'll say, "Yeah, you remember in the Family Guy that one episode?" Because that's all they really that's their only exposure they really had to it, right? But those shows, though, the people who are writing those shows, they're affected by the mainstream views on this kind of stuff too. And so it's like a virus. It just keeps spreading. You don't know where the people who are putting out the nonsense, it filters through the mainstream media. It gets into the minds of the writers of TV shows like The Simpsons or Family Guy, and then to the minds of the regular Joe sitting there watching TV. Anyway, he continues with his comment here. It says, another separate skeptic is a huge mega fan of science fiction, novels, shows, movies, and has real hang-ups with how the UFO phenomenon is manifesting itself. He simply can't get past his preconceived notions of how contact with extraterrestrials will go down. The only way it will happen, in his opinion, is these ships will with jet engine-like thrusters, what you'd see in Star Trek, Star Wars, etc., will show up and roll out a big red carpet in front of the White House, and all of our leaders will get together with the aliens and have a big powwow. Why? Because that's how it happens in sci-fi, and since it hasn't happened yet, there simply can't be aliens, or it's impossible for them to reach us across the distances in space. Now, this is what we were just talking about. I believe that's how this film critic is thinking, and that Richard Roper, the article I was just reading, that's how he's thinking. And a lot of people are thinking this way. They think it's going to be some kind of a regal event, like it's going to be a big show. It's going to be broadcast live throughout the world. That's how they think this is going to go down. But they're not thinking outside of the box. read so much science fiction or watched so many science fiction films that they think, oh, it has to be this way, just like in the movies. That's how it's going to be, right? That's how it's going to be. It can't be. What are you talking about? They're not going to show themselves? Come on, are you stupid? They think you're stupid for thinking otherwise. So he says, and he finishes up here, he says, so there you have it. The debunkers really don't seem to play a big factor in people's opinions on these topics, but animated adult comedy shows and sci-fi in general does. Yeah, and that's very, very true. But I do think that because we're not getting, I mean, once we get to a position where this is accepted, when governments finally tell the truth, right? Once we get to that point, well, I think it's going to be a different story. But I think the reason that it is like this, though, that these shows are like this, is because, you know, this virus of disinformation and misinformation, which starts with governments and debunkers, and then just spreads, you know, like a cancer into the minds of millions of people across the world, billions of people across the world, thinking that the whole thing's a joke or it has to be done this way or that way. There's only one way it's ever going to go down. You know, that's why I just think that. You know, but yeah, most people, you're right. No, most people haven't heard of debunkers, but because we haven't accepted this, we're never going to accept it. We're never going to get to a certain point until everybody starts demanding the truth here. But because we have some people siding with the government all the time, right? Oh yeah, see, the government said this. Oh, like John Greenwald from the Black Vault. He seems like he's always, especially when it comes to Lou Elizondo, he's always siding with the government all the time. Right, like he thinks that, well, you see this document they said right here, so that means, you know, that's how he presents it basically. But in reality, how could you trust? You can never trust the Pentagon when it comes to UFOs. They've been lying about this for almost 80 years now. But yeah, that was definitely some great insight there. I really appreciate that comment. Thank you very much for sharing. Anyway, I want to say thank you for joining me. Until next time.